An Apache girl was carrying a baby, not hers. The lonely rancher asked no questions and opened his door. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty road leading to Jack Harmon's ranch in the rugged mountains of Arizona. The 53-year-old rancher wiped sweat from his weathered brow as he finished mending the fence line that marked the eastern boundary of his property. 20 years of solitude had etched deep lines into his face, each one a testament to the harsh desert environment and the weight of memories he carried. Jack's ranch sat at the edge of the Apache reservation, a modest spread with a small herd of cattle and a 2-story wooden house that had seen better days. The nearest town was 30 miles away, which suited Jack just fine. After his wife Sarah died of pneumonia, he had retreated from the world, finding comfort in the predictable rhythm of ranch life and the vast, empty landscape. As he gathered his tools, the distant figure of a woman stumbling along the road caught his attention. Even from a distance, he could tell she was Native American by her long, dark hair and distinctive clothing. But what made him drop his hammer was the small bundle clutched protectively against her chest. Jack hesitated, torn between his instinct to avoid entanglements and the undeniable fact that someone in distress was approaching his property. The woman's unsteady gait suggested exhaustion or injury. Making his decision, he started walking toward her. As the distance between them closed, Jack could see she was young, perhaps early 20s, with the characteristic features of the local Apache tribe. Her clothes were dusty and torn in places, and dried blood stained her sleeve, but it was her eyes that struck him most. Dark, determined, and filled with a desperate kind of courage. "Need help?" Jack called out, keeping his voice neutral. The young woman stopped, her body tensing like a cornered animal. The bundle in her arms moved slightly, confirming Jack's suspicion that she was carrying an infant. "Water?" she said, her voice hoarse from thirst. Please." Jack nodded toward his house. "Come on, then." She followed him at a cautious distance. When they reached the porch, Jack filled a glass from the outdoor pump and handed it to her. She drank greedily with one hand, the other still cradling the baby. "I'm Jack Harmon," he said when she finished. "This is my ranch." "Nita," she replied simply, offering no last name or explanation. Jack glanced at the bundle. "Your baby?" A shadow crossed Nita's face. "No," she admitted after a long pause, "but she needs me." In that moment, Jack knew he was standing at a crossroads. The smart thing would be to drive them both to the reservation or to town, let the authorities sort it out. But something in Nita's expression, a mixture of defiance and desperate hope, reminded him of his late wife. "There's a storm coming," he said, glancing at the darkening sky. "You'd better come inside." As Nita stepped past him into the house, the baby stirred and began to cry. Jack watched as she gently soothed the infant, murmuring soft words in her native language. The sound of a baby's cry in his empty house stirred memories he'd long suppressed. Later that evening, after Nita had fallen asleep on his couch, the baby nestled beside her. Jack sat at his kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee gone cold. He knew harboring them might bring trouble, especially if someone was looking for that baby, but turning them away felt impossible now. Outside, the wind picked up, howling around the eaves of the old house as the promised storm arrived. Jack Harmon had no way of knowing that this night marked the beginning of a journey that would change all their lives forever. Wait, this story is just beginning, and there's so much more to discover. Who is Nita, and why does she have a baby that isn't hers? What secrets is she running from? If you want to find out what happens next, subscribe to our channel right now. Don't miss a single chapter of this heart-wrenching tale of courage, redemption, and unexpected family. Hit that subscribe button. The rest of Jack and Nita's story is waiting for you. 3 days passed, and Nita remained at the ranch. Jack had offered her the spare bedroom upstairs, but she preferred to sleep on the couch, keeping the baby, whom she called Lily, close beside her. Each morning, Jack expected to find them gone, but each morning, Nita was in the kitchen, attempting to cook breakfast as a way of repaying his hospitality. On the fourth morning, as they sat at the kitchen table, the baby contentedly sleeping in a makeshift crib fashioned from a dresser drawer, Jack finally asked the question that had been hanging between them. "Who's after you, Nita?" Her hands froze around her coffee mug. "What makes you think someone is after me?" 20 years living alone makes a man observant," Jack replied. "You check the windows every time you hear a noise. You sleep with your shoes on. And that baby—" He hesitated. "If she's not yours, someone's looking for her." Nita's shoulders slumped, the weight of her secret visibly pressing down on her. "Her name is Lily. Her mother was my cousin, Eleanor." "Was?" Jack prompted gently. "She died 3 weeks ago. Complications after the birth." Nita's voice was flat, as if reciting facts could keep the grief at bay. "Elena wasn't married. The father is a white man from Tucson, a businessman. He visited the reservation for some land deal, and he doesn't want the baby." Nita's expression hardened. "He doesn't know about her. Elena kept it secret, but his brother found out after she died. He came to the reservation, saying the family would take Lily." Her hands trembled slightly. "I heard them talking. They don't want Lily. They want to avoid scandal. They were going to send her away to an orphanage in California." Jack nodded, understanding dawning. "So you took her. She's my blood," Nita said fiercely. "On her deathbed, Elena asked me to care for her daughter. I promised. The tribal council didn't support you. Some would have, but the brother, he brought gifts, money. Some of the elders thought it would be better for Lily to grow up with advantages they couldn't provide." Nita looked down at her hands. "I had no choice but to run." Jack stood up and walked to the window, looking out at his land. The morning sun illuminated the mountains in the distance, turning them gold and purple. He'd come here to escape his past, to build walls around his grief. Now this young woman and baby had breached those walls without even trying. "My wife and I," he said, his back still to Nita, "we tried for years to have a child. When Sarah died, she was 3 months pregnant. Our first—" He hadn't spoken of this to anyone in nearly 2 decades, yet the words came surprisingly easy now. "I left everything behind after that. Came out here to forget, I suppose." When he turned back, Nita was watching him with understanding in her dark eyes. "Did it work? The forgetting?" Jack shook his head with a rueful smile. "Not so much." That afternoon, Jack drove into town for supplies. At the general store, he hesitated before adding baby formula, diapers, and a proper bassinet to his usual order. The storekeeper, Mrs. Patterson, raised her eyebrows but asked no questions as she rang up his purchases. As Jack loaded the supplies into his truck, Sheriff Miller approached, tipping his hat in greeting. "Jack, don't usually see you twice in 1 month." Jack nodded, keeping his expression neutral. "Need extra supplies? Thinking of expanding the herd?" "That's so." The sheriff seemed to accept this explanation. "Well, keep an eye out, will you? Got a report about a young Apache woman who took off with a baby. Baby's uncle is raising quite a fuss. Got the tribal police involved too." Jack's heart quickened, but years of solitude had taught him to mask his reactions. "That right? What she wanted for?" "Kidnapping, technically, though it's complicated by tribal jurisdiction. The baby's half white. Father's family has some pull in Tucson." Sheriff Miller shrugged. "Just thought you should know, being so close to the reservation." "Appreciate the heads up," Jack said, closing the truck's tailgate. "I'll keep my eyes open." As he drove back to the ranch, dust billowing behind his truck, Jack's mind raced. He had no legal right to harbor Nita and the baby. If caught, he could face charges himself. The sensible course would be to convince Nita to return to the reservation, to fight for Lily through proper channels. But as he pulled up to the house and saw Nita sitting on the porch steps, gently rocking Lily in her arms, he knew what his decision would be. Some promises transcended law and logic. Elena had entrusted her daughter to Nita, And now, somehow, Nita had entrusted both of them to him. That night, as a half-moon rose over the mountains, Jack made a silent promise of his own. A week turned into 2, and a fragile routine developed at the ranch. Jack taught Nita how to bottle feed Lily properly and how to check the temperature of the formula on her wrist. In return, Nita helped with chores around the ranch, proving surprisingly adept at handling the chickens and even assisting with the cattle. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of orange and purple, Lily sleeping peacefully in her new bassinet, Jack voiced the plan that had been forming in his mind. "I know a place," he said. "A small ranch over in New Mexico belongs to an old friend of mine. He's been trying to sell it for years." Nita looked at him questioningly. "It's remote, good water source, enough land to run a decent herd. Most importantly, it's far from Arizona and the reservation." Jack took a deep breath. "I've been thinking of buying it. For you and Lily." Nita's eyes widened. "Why would you do that?" "Because you can't keep running forever," Jack said simply. "You need a place where you can raise that girl in peace, where no one will think to look for you." "I can't accept such a gift," Nita protested. "I have no way to repay you." Jack shook his head. "It's not a gift. It's an investment. I'll teach you ranching. You're a natural with animals. In time, you'll make the place profitable." He paused. "Besides, I've been sitting on Sarah's life insurance money for 20 years. Might as well put it to good use." Before Nita could respond, the distant sound of vehicles approaching broke the evening quiet. Jack stood, instantly alert. No one came to his ranch unannounced, especially not after sundown. "Take Lily inside," he said tersely, "and use the back door. My truck keys are on the hook by the kitchen. If you hear trouble, don't hesitate." Nita gathered the baby and slipped into the house. Jack remained on the porch, outwardly calm as 2 vehicles, a tribal police cruiser and an expensive black SUV, pulled up in front of his house. 4 men got out. 2 wore the uniform of the tribal police. One was dressed in civilian clothes but had the bearing of law enforcement, and the 4th wore an expensive suit that looked out of place in the desert setting. This last man approached the porch, his face tight with barely contained anger. "Mr. Harmon, I'm Richard Blackwood. I believe you're harboring my niece." Jack kept his expression neutral. "You don't know what you're talking about." The man in civilian clothes stepped forward. "I'm Detective Sandoval, Tucson PD. We have reason to believe a woman named Nita Begay is here with an infant she abducted from the San Carlos reservation. Sheriff Miller mentioned you'd been buying baby supplies in town." Jack silently cursed Mrs. Patterson's gossiping. "I buy a lot of things. Doesn't mean I'm hiding anyone." "Then you wouldn't mind if we take a look inside," Blackwood said, his tone making it clear it wasn't a request. "Actually, I would mind," Jack replied evenly. "This is private property. Unless you have a warrant, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Detective Sandoval stepped closer. "Mr. Harmon, abduction is a serious crime. If you're helping Ms. Begay, you could be charged as an accessory. And if I'm not, you're trespassing," Jack countered. "Either way, without a warrant, this conversation is over." One of the tribal officers spoke up. "The child's welfare is our priority. Her father's family can provide opportunities the reservation cannot." "Interesting," Jack said. "From what I hear, the father doesn't even know the child exists, and the family's plan is to ship her off to an orphanage." Blackwood's face flushed. "That's a lie. We intend to raise Lily as part of our family." "So you admit there is a child," Jack noted. "And you know her name is Lily. Funny. I never mentioned any names." A tense silence fell. Detective Sandoval exchanged glances with the tribal officers. "We'll be back with a warrant," Sandoval finally said. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." As the men returned to their vehicles, Blackwood lingered, his eyes cold. "You don't know who you're dealing with, old man. That child is a Blackwood by blood. We take care of our own." Funny way of showing it, Jack replied, abandoning her mother during pregnancy, planning to dump the baby in an orphanage. My brother made mistakes, Blackwood hissed. I'm cleaning them up. Stay out of family business. When the vehicles had disappeared down the road, Jack went inside. Nita stood in the kitchen, Lily clutched to her chest, truck keys in her hand. You didn't tell them we were here, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Wasn't their business to know, Jack replied. But they'll be back, with a warrant next time. We need to move quickly. That night, they packed essential supplies into Jack's truck. As Nita prepared Lily for the journey, Jack made a phone call to his old friend in New Mexico, making arrangements that would change all their lives. They left before dawn, Jack's old truck loaded with the essentials, clothes, food, baby supplies, and a small box containing what few valuables Jack couldn't bear to leave behind. Among them was a faded photograph of Sarah, smiling on their wedding day, her eyes bright with hopes for a future that would never come. Are you sure about this? Nita asked, as they pulled away from the ranch. Lily, sleeping peacefully in a car seat Jack had installed the night before. You're leaving everything behind. Jack glanced in the rearview mirror at the silhouette of his house, darkened against the first pale streaks of morning. Been thinking about selling for years, he said, though they both knew it wasn't true. Besides, what's there to stay for? Empty rooms and memories. They took back roads, avoiding main highways where law enforcement might be on the lookout. Jack had spent decades exploring the borderlands between Arizona and New Mexico. He knew paths that didn't appear on any map. Dirt tracks used by ranchers and, occasionally, those with reasons to avoid official border crossings. By midday, the Arizona desert gave way to the more varied landscape of western New Mexico. They stopped only when necessary, for gas at remote stations where Jack paid cash, or to feed and change Lily in the privacy of the truck. During those stops, watching Nita tend to the baby with gentle efficiency, Jack found himself remembering what it had felt like to plan for his own child's arrival. The nursery he and Sarah had prepared, painted yellow because they hadn't wanted to know the gender. The tiny clothes Sarah had bought, folded and waiting in a drawer that remained unopened after her death. You're good with her, Jack commented, as Nita soothed Lily after a feeding. Nita smiled, the expression transforming her serious face. On the reservation, children belong to everyone. I helped raise my cousins, my sister's children. Her smile faded. Elena and I grew up together. She was more sister than cousin. Tell me about her, Jack said, starting the truck again. As they drove through the New Mexico landscape, Nita shared stories of her cousin, how Elena had excelled in school, earning a scholarship to study nursing in Phoenix, how she had returned to the reservation to help her people, how she had met Richard Blackwood's brother at a community health meeting. She believed he loved her, Nita said, her voice tight with old anger. When she told him about the pregnancy, he promised to return. Weeks passed, then months. Finally, his secretary called to say he was engaged to a banker's daughter in Tucson. Jack nodded, unsurprised. He had seen similar stories play out over the decades. Privileged men taking what they wanted from the reservation, leaving broken promises in their wake. Elena was strong, Nita continued. She decided to raise the baby alone. She was healthy throughout the pregnancy, but the birth, her voice faltered. There were complications. By the time they got her to the hospital in town, it was too late. They drove in silence for a while, the only sound Lily's occasional coos from the back seat. What about you? Jack finally asked. No family, wondering where you've gone. My parents died when I was young, raised by my grandmother until she passed last year. Nita looked out at the passing landscape. The elders respect me for my knowledge of traditional ways, but many think I'm too stubborn, too quick to challenge authority. Can't imagine why, Jack said dryly, earning a rare laugh from Nita. By late afternoon, they approached their destination, a small ranch nestled in a valley, with mountains rising in the distance. A weathered sign reading Cooper's Place hung crookedly on the gate. Jack's friend, Bill Cooper, was waiting on the porch of a modest house that had seen better days but appeared structurally sound. In his 70s now, Bill had the lean, tough build of a lifelong rancher. "Jack Harmon," he called as they pulled up. 20 years without a visit, and now you show up with a family in tow. Life never ceases to surprise. As Jack made introductions, carefully omitting details about their circumstances, Bill showed them around the property, 100 acres of decent grazing land, a small but functional barn, a chicken coop, and a vegetable garden gone wild with neglect. "It's not much," Bill admitted, "but the well's good, roof doesn't leak, and the nearest neighbor's 5 miles away. Privacy's guaranteed." That evening, as they sat around Bill's kitchen table sharing a simple meal, the old rancher handed Jack a set of keys and a folder of documents. "All signed and transferred, as we discussed on the phone," Bill said. "Far as anyone knows, I sold to a corporation based in Texas. Your name appears nowhere." Jack nodded gratefully. "I owe you, Bill." "Nonsense. You're overpaying for this old place as it is." Bill glanced at Nita, who was settling Lily in a borrowed crib. "Besides, seems like you've got your reasons." After Bill retired to the guest bedroom, leaving them the master bedroom, which Jack insisted Nita take, Jack stepped outside onto the porch. The night was clear, stars scattered across the dark sky like diamonds on velvet. In the distance, coyotes called to one another, their cries echoing through the valley. Footsteps behind him announced Nita's presence. "Will he ask questions?" she inquired softly, nodding toward the house where Bill slept. "Not his way," Jack assured her. "Bill spent his life minding his own business and expecting others to do the same." Nita leaned against the porch railing, her profile illuminated by moonlight. "Why are you doing this, Jack? Risking everything for strangers?" Jack considered the question, searching for an answer that would make sense to her and to himself. 20 years ago," he said slowly, "when I lost Sarah and our unborn child, something inside me broke. I've been living half a life, going through motions, waiting for—" He paused, realizing the truth as he spoke it. Waiting for a reason to fully live again. He turned to face her. "I don't know if this is redemption, second chances, or just an old man's foolishness, but for the first time in decades, I feel like I'm doing something that matters." Nita studied him for a long moment, then nodded, accepting his explanation without further questions. Together, they stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead, each contemplating the uncertain future they had chosen. 1 year later, Cooper's place, now unofficially renamed Three Hearts Ranch by Nita, had undergone a transformation. The overgrown garden now produced vegetables in neat rows, chickens scratched contentedly in a refurbished coop, and a small herd of cattle grazed on the revitalized pastures. The house, too, had changed. Fresh paint brightened the exterior, new curtains hung in windows that had been meticulously repaired, and flowers grew in pots along the porch where Jack sat in a rocking chair, watching Lily take wobbly steps across the yard, her chubby hands reaching for a butterfly. At 15 months, Lily was a bright, curious child with her mother's Apache features and startling blue eyes, her only obvious inheritance from her father. She had Jack wrapped around her tiny finger from the moment she first called him Pop Pop, a name that had stuck despite Nita's attempts to teach her to say Mr. Harmon. Nita emerged from the garden, a basket of tomatoes on her hip. The year had changed her too. The constant wariness in her eyes had faded, replaced by quiet confidence. She had thrown herself into learning ranching with the same determination she'd shown in fleeing with Lily, absorbing Jack's lessons and adding her own innovations. "Someone's coming," she said, nodding toward the dirt road leading to their property. Her tone was calm. This was no longer cause for alarm, though they remained cautious about visitors. Jack squinted at the approaching vehicle, then relaxed. "It's just Miguel's truck, probably bringing those fence posts I ordered." Miguel Ortiz was their closest neighbor, a third-generation rancher who had become their main connection to the small community 5 miles away. He asked no questions about the unusual family that had taken over Cooper's place, appreciating Jack's ranching experience and Nita's willingness to help when Miguel's wife had been hospitalized last winter. As Miguel's truck pulled up, Jack noticed a second vehicle behind it, a police cruiser. His body tensed, old instincts kicking in. "Take Lily inside," he murmured to Nita, who had also spotted the cruiser. Without a word, she scooped up the toddler and disappeared into the house. Miguel approached first, looking uncomfortable. "Jack, Sheriff Ramirez wanted to speak with you. I told him I was heading your way with those posts." Sheriff Ramirez was a stocky man in his 40s, with a carefully neutral expression that revealed nothing of his intentions. "Mr. Harmon, I'm Sheriff Ramirez. Got a few questions, if you don't mind." Jack nodded, keeping his expression equally neutral. "What can I help you with, Sheriff?" "Had some inquiries from Arizona authorities about a missing persons case. Apache woman named Nita Begay and an infant named Lily Begay. Description matches a woman seen with you in town last month." Jack's mind raced, calculating options. Denial seemed pointless. Miguel had surely seen Nita and Lily around the ranch numerous times. "What exactly are they wanted for?" he asked, playing for time. "Initially, kidnapping," the sheriff replied, "though things have gotten complicated since then. The child's father recently learned of her existence and has filed for custody rights. Seems he never knew about the pregnancy." Jack felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. This was the scenario they had feared most, that Lily's biological father would eventually seek her out. The screen door opened, and Nita stepped onto the porch, head held high. To Jack's surprise, she was carrying a folder of documents rather than Lily. "Sheriff Ramirez," she said calmly. "I'm Nita Harmon. I believe these papers will answer your questions." She handed the folder to the confused sheriff, who opened it and began scanning the contents. "These are adoption papers," he said, looking up sharply. "And a marriage certificate." Jack was as startled as the sheriff. He knew about the adoption papers. They had paid a lawyer in El Paso to handle Lily's legal adoption 6 months ago, using the story that she was the orphaned child of Nita's cousin. But the marriage certificate was news to him. "My husband and I were married in a private ceremony last fall," Nita explained, her voice steady despite the flush in her cheeks. "Shortly after, we adopted my cousin Elena's daughter, following Elena's death in childbirth. Everything was legal and properly filed." Sheriff Ramirez looked skeptical. "And the father consented to this adoption?" "The father was listed as unknown on the birth certificate," Nita replied. "Elena never named him officially. By the time he came forward, the adoption was already finalized." The sheriff studied the documents for a long moment, then looked at Jack. "You have anything to add, Mr. Harmon?" Jack rose from his rocker, moving to stand beside Nita. "Only that Lily is our daughter now, legally and in every way that matters. We've built a life here, Sheriff, a good life." After what seemed an eternity, Sheriff Ramirez handed the folder back to Nita. "These appear to be in order. I'll need to verify them, of course." "Of course," Nita agreed. "You should know," the sheriff added, "if these check out, it doesn't necessarily end things. The biological father could still challenge the adoption, especially if he can prove he wasn't given the opportunity to claim paternity." "We understand," Jack said, "but we'll cross that bridge if we come to it." After the sheriff and Miguel departed, Jack turned to Nita, questions in his eyes. "Before you ask," she said quietly, "I didn't forge anything. Bill Cooper helped us. He has a friend who's a justice of the peace in Texas. And you didn't think to mention this marriage to me?" Jack asked, more bewildered than angry. "It was Bill's idea. He said it would strengthen the adoption, give us more legal standing." Nita looked down. "It's just a paper, Jack. It doesn't have to change anything between us." Jack was silent for a long moment. Then, surprising himself as much as Nita, He began to laugh, a deep, genuine laugh that seemed to come from a place inside him that had been closed off for decades. "What's funny?" Nita asked, confused. 20 years avoiding entanglements," Jack said, wiping his eyes. "Now I've got a wife, a daughter, and apparently a legal battle brewing with some businessmen from Tucson." Nita's expression remained serious. "Are you angry?" Jack shook his head. "No, not angry." He looked past her to where Lily had appeared in the doorway, clutching her favorite stuffed horse, just wondering what Sarah would make of all this. "What do you think she'd say?" Nita asked softly. Jack considered the question, thinking of the woman he had loved, her compassion, her strength, her unfailing ability to see the right path when he was lost. "I think," he said slowly, "she'd say it was about damn time I started living again." That evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, casting the valley in golden light, the three of them sat on the porch steps. Lily, tired from a day of exploration, dozed in Nita's lap. Jack pulled out his worn leather wallet and carefully removed the faded photograph of Sarah. "She would have liked you," he told Nita, showing her the picture. "You have the same spirit." Nita studied the image, then looked up at Jack with understanding in her dark eyes. "Is that why you helped us? Because I reminded you of her?" "Maybe at first," Jack admitted, "but now," he gestured at the ranch, at Lily, at the life they had built together. "Now it's about who we are, not who we've lost." The future remained uncertain. The sheriff would return, the biological father might pursue his claim, and their unconventional family would face challenges they couldn't yet imagine. But as night fell over Three Hearts Ranch, Jack Harmon felt a peace he hadn't known in 20 years. He had opened his door to a desperate young woman carrying a baby that wasn't hers. In doing so, he had found what he never expected to find again: a family, a purpose, and the courage to embrace an uncertain future, whatever it might bring.